Thank you for joining us today. We're at the Powers Brown Art Gallery at the Harriman campus of Roane State Community College. I'm Mike Hill. We'll be speaking today to artist Charles Edward Williams via Zoom. You've been enjoying his work for the past couple of months, and we'll be having additional gallery showings in the spring semester, but wanted to actually have an in-depth conversation with him today about his artistic project. Charles, I've been trying to think back to the last time that we did an informal interview, and I asked about the significance of showing work by an African-American artist, work that features primarily African-American figures to a largely white audience. And you told me that was an important but loaded question. And
Yes.
I've been thinking a lot about the loaded part of that, that I felt like maybe I had asked a naive question or one that put you on the spot. When I've been giving gallery tours, though, I have been emphasizing something that you've said several times, both to me and on your website, about radical forgiveness and
Yes.
about the last conversation we had, you started off about us, and you clarified that by us you didn't just mean Black people being labeled, but us human beings being labeled. So in any sort of colonial or exploitative relationship, it takes a toll on both parties, and you're trying to capture that in some of the work. And I've also been trying to put your work into the context of other artists, and one of my favorites is Titus Kaphar, and the TED Talk that he gave about the Franz Hall painting, which he says we know more about the lace on the woman's collar, and we know more about dogs in Dutch paintings than we know about the Black servant or slave who's part of the family's wealth. And he says he's not trying to erase history, he's trying to amend it and change our focus. So I was wondering if that also applied to what you're doing with a lot of the work here, especially the more violent, more disturbing works.
Absolutely. I think that when we look at an array of human conditions, I think we can get short-sighted with our own perceptions. And so as an African-American man first, I have a lens that is unique and distinct from other cultures. And so when I look at the paradigm our history has shown and the stories that have not been told, the compassion that I feel from diving into these narratives and these stories that are hidden and that are washed away, it is very compelling in a way that frees me to take an advocate stance on who I am first as an African American man, and then second, to recharge the conversation of what America history is. America history is all of our history. And so these narratives and these moments, I feel a sense of urgency to share that to the viewer and to create that in a way that's alluring, that it's seductive and attractive, but also with the emphasis of peeling back the the humanistic intent that was and what it can be. And so for me, art is that vehicle for me diving into these stories, diving into these narratives, and looking at the human condition and seeing how can they be celebrated, how can they be acknowledged, how can they be shared in our social, political, contemporary climate.
Well, I like the fact that you use the word diving because I know the stories you've told me about, your own relationship with water and how clearly it is, I guess, renewing, but also very dangerous. And I would imagine diving into some of these images and peeling back the layers, it can be dangerous because you almost, I would imagine, and I think what worries me about your work, and that's a good thing, that I can never feel complacent about it. I can never walk in and see it and just not notice it.
Exactly.
But it does disturb me how appealing I find it aesthetically, and what you were saying about these images being seductive in some ways. I get caught up in the texture, the depth of the paint, the shadows, the details, that sometimes it's like a myopic view, and I have to step back and remind myself of what I'm really looking at.
Yeah, I mean, the human, the seductive part, when I paint the works and that viewers see, like you're sharing, is yes, the technical proficiency that I've been able to master, but it's also when I think about this from a human condition, you're in some of the images that you have, you're literally seeing a human being choked, or you're seeing a man being suffocated or strained, attained. And so for me, as an African American man, those are emotions that I've experienced, in our climate, and also hope that the more we have discussions and talk about it like you and I are doing, that it brings less about the technical proficiency and more of the human conditioning that, African Americans have or have gone through and deal with. And then also too, for our, our counterparts, white America, to join us collectively in bridging the gap. And so again, that's why I said earlier, I try to make sure that I heighten the sophistication of the medium, whichever medium I choose, to use that fits the content that I'm studying or the story that I'm wanting to share. And so within that, the psychological aspects and the investigative parts that I do in the studio is I'm literally like questioning myself to find how many characteristics and physical properties can I create with this medium. And when I do that, I try to match it with that human experience. I try to match that energy, the stroke, the layering, the smearing, the smudging, the discarding, the scraping, all of those different elements, technical elements that you see. I try to match it with the humanistic experience that is shown from the photograph that I'm using as a reference. And then once I have sort of a guideline from that, about 15, 20 minutes, then I'll take it away. I'll put the photograph away because I then want to see what charges and energy and conversations am I then having with the medium, and then from what I've studied, prior looking at the photograph. And I think that's that sort of sweet spot that I get lost in to try to share with people, that these human emotions that evoke technical proficiency, the human emotions is something that we all have, no matter what background. And that is the commonality that I continue to share over and over and over. And the figure, the portrait, the body, that is for me the best representative of those human emotions.
Well, I certainly think so too, because just how vulnerable the body is. And of course, I see them and I think of Warhol's Birmingham Race Riot, which works exactly the opposite direction, because there he's enhancing not just the ugliness of the image, but the ugliness of the medium with reproducing the newsprint texture, the Ben-Day dots in the printing process, and getting across that idea that it's very possible to become numb to these images. And so he's taking it in that direction, you're taking it in a completely opposite direction, and I think we need both.
I agree. I think we need both as well. And the other thing, and I will say, and I'll, maybe I'm repeating myself, and I hope I'm not, but the beauty, the beauty comes from the imagery, in regards to it being uncomfortable or gory, or that the beauty is the emotion that comes from looking at these stark images, these unsettling images. And so from that beauty of the emotion, so again, if I'm just using, for example, one of the pieces, Chokehold, the beauty that's there is, wow, this literally happened in our history. And then the questions could arise, well, what if this was my brother? What if this was me? What if this was my son, daughter, etc.? And so what the beauty can do is actually draw you into that word that you shared a second ago, is vulnerability. It draws you into the vulnerability, which allows then the openness and the optimism and the wonder and the curiosity to then, therefore, if you continue to push that and stay in that space, but push it further, then you can get dialogue. And that's kind of like that beautiful ugly, or the beautiful gory, spot. And I remember reading years and years ago, when I was in grad school, reading, of Susan Sontag and her writings, and she was sharing about just the emotional loss that we as humans have when we're looking at images of war and violence, and we're looking at these images over and over and over and over, and that what's lost is that the connection, right? And so when I read her writings in grad school, I said to myself, this is what I can identify. And it was so powerful within her that I felt from her writings that I said, there's a side that I want to share. It's not just African-American experience. There's a there's a geographical, African American experience that I can also share. Southern Black culture, as we've heard that term, so that I can share and bring forth to the table for conversations, because there are things that happen currently in the North that don't happen in the South, and associations and all that. So that's that I love this conversation. So, but you hit the nail on the head when you said the vulnerability there and the beauty from that.
Yeah, and I was thinking about when you were bringing up about just things that you had from your own experience, things from where you grew up, the heritage of the South, that all the scholarship about Black art is, well, not all, of course, but a good chunk of it is devoted to the absence of
Yes.
Black art in a museum setting and the way it's consigned to folk art or handicrafts and the
Right.
and the G's bin quilting,
Right.
and that I think you're capturing some of that same spirit,
Yeah.
but you're coming from the formally trained perspective, and I think you're introducing to an audience who may not know, who may not
Yeah.
expect Black
Yeah.
fine artists. You're introducing them to that practice combined with a social consciousness, combined with a regional awareness.
Yeah. No, so true. And in my studies, I had to, I was remembering listening to, Kerry James Marshall, and he said, you got to know the game, you got to play the game, you got to know what they know, and find your way into the game. And so for me, it was okay if I'm wanting to share this, Southern Black experience as a term, and which is my experience, then I need to master. I need to learn what they know. And what that means is first learn American history, but also learn at the same time art history. And then how does that, and how can I navigate that or insert myself into the canon? And so again, that whole mastery comes from the technical proficiency of me just studying. And that process has actually been very liberating. The more that I've been able to study and find these untold stories, and also uncover me as an artist, as well as, the message and the voice that I'm trying to share, it's been freeing. It really has. And that's that beauty. That's the beauty. That goes back to that beauty that we were talking about.
Well, since we've had this really great far-ranging discussion,
Yeah.
could we look at a couple of paintings and get you to guide us through what we should be seeing as connoisseurs, I guess?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
The painting that we were able to purchase with the President's Imagination Grant to start a permanent collection here at Roane State is the painting Chokehold, which you mentioned several times. And I just thought it would be great to hear you describe it and tell us the various components and the choices you made.
Yeah. So I'll give you the story, the background. So when I first started the series, there was in 2016 there was a huge influx of police brutality, shootings and killings, and I'm still sort of amazed by that, but it is part of our history. And so I mourned for like 3 to 4 days in my studio. I didn't make any work. I played a lot of Miles Davis, just to sort of understand, my feelings, because there was such a fear that from what I saw and witnessed, that I could be targeted. I was them, and I am them. And so, or I could be them. And that was very unsettling for me, because I've tried to make choices that would uplift the spirit that I believe in, and that is community. And so, after coming somewhat out of mourning, I did some writings, and I said to myself, I started thinking about my grandmother and my grandfather, like, and asking questions like, how did they make it through the 60s? How did they make it through troubling times? And so my grandfather, who could not read and write, he shared with me these principles of character. And what he shared was, when you look someone in their eyes, what it establishes, and it establishes trust. And when you, and integrity. And then when you shake a person's hand, that's another sign of trust. And so these humanistic, things that he was able to do, to be able to feed 5 children, and build his name within the community without, knowing how to read and write, was through these principles. And so I asked myself, the question, have we lost that? And I think we have. I think we have. So from that, I started doing my own, again, investigation. Who in art history documented the signs of the times of war and of distraught, and so Goya did, for me. And so when I came across his work, his disaster of war series and his etchings of him documenting the Spanish War, the way that he did, the way that he captured those imagery, it was so beautifully done. And there were 3 components. One of the components that he did is he incorporated religious iconography. Second thing he did was he repeated the image to create movement within the etchings. And then 3, he added his own views within the works. Maybe that the perpetrator was in white or shadow, or vice versa. So he included his own perceptions and thoughts and ideas. So what I said to myself, okay, well, with these police killings that happened in 2016, what was sort of a recent riot or war that has happened amongst Black men? And so therefore I came across images of the race riots that happened all in different cities. And from that, the way that I was able to select the photographs was that I looked at I remember what my grandfather said about the eyes and the hands. And so I selected the photographs to paint from based on the eyes and the hands. That's how I was able to choose the photographs that I would paint from. And then once I, would work from the image for about 15, 20 minutes, like I shared earlier, then I was able to sort of pull and extract from Goya, his own views, and then me inserting my own views. So with this one here, Choco, that the university purchased, you're looking at, an African-American man who he's being, choked. But when you look at the perpetrator, there's 2 perpetrators. When you look at them, they're in white. And there's a spiritual sense in that when you think about the connotation of, the historic connotation of white, the halo, the angel, the religious connotation. So what I did with the first perpetrator is I made him all white. And then what I did with the second perpetrator, I have him looking away. And I purposely did that because from looking at hundreds of images of where the black body, is being treated like an object and treated like nothing, the morning came, and so I wanted to emphasize that when it came to the plight of an African American, this is what it has continued to be and to look like, a white person looking away. And so over the years, when you think about, our history, American history, we've avoided the conversation. We've avoided the conversations. We've avoided the uncomfortable moments of, yes, this happened. And I wanted to sort of infuse that within this piece. And I feel like this is one of my favorite pieces.
So what you said about religious iconography, is it is it too literal to read the black man as a Christ figure and the other two as centurion guards?
Spot on.
Okay.
Spot on. You hit the nail on the head. Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Spot on. And again, that's the beauty that goes right back to the beauty that we spoke about.
And I think that raises an interesting conversation, a side conversation about what color is Jesus in the black church.
There you go. And coming from the South of Southern Baptists as well. Yeah. So yeah.
And is Christianity an imposition and a holdover?
Right.
So
Exactly.
there's this.
Yeah.
It's laden with meaning that you just have to unpack.
Yes.
And something I did not notice until it was hanging is it looks like a fingerprint here in the lower corner. Is that your mark?
That is my mark. That's very intentional because I wanted to, when I was thinking about, so the series, actually, the title of the entire series, Put Your Hands Where My Eyes Can See, I took that from Busta Rhymes' song. I used to listen to Busta Rhymes when I was growing up in high school, and so he has a rap song called "Put Your Hands Where My Eyes Can See," but it was fitting for me to use that as a title of the series because when I've heard and I've watched tapes of police recordings, they would say, "Stop, put your hands where my eyes can see." And so I said, okay, well, how can I bring this loaded piece or pieces back to full circle to me? How can I insert myself in this? And so I thought about the identification process when you get tagged and you are being arrested and going to jail. You use your thumb. You have to leave, have a thumbprint. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to show that as an African American man that African Americans have been targeted when it comes to the judicial system, and that process is specifically created to label and to mark and to tag. But I'm also saying, hey, look at what I'm highlighting. I was here, I did this, and this is my mark. So that thumbprint is more of a liberating mark for me.
And I would imagine it kind of calls to mind your grandfather as well.
Exactly. Yep.
Because without the ability to write his name, he had to make his mark in some way.
There you go. Absolutely. Yeah, it's beautiful. And so that's why I said like the series and that piece is one of my favorites. So
Well, I'm thrilled that we were able to get the painting. It's also one of my favorites, but it's one I would not be able to hold in a room for very long. So, which I think is actually paying you a huge compliment. We've been talking for over a half hour, and I don't want to tire you out, and I don't want to wear out an audience who's watching this. So I think between this conversation and the one we taped earlier in the fall,
Yeah.
we've given people a good overview.
Yeah.
And my plans for the spring keep some of these same paintings up, but as I told you, I've got some folk art pieces, self-taught artists that I want to bring in, other formally trained Black artists to hold a conversation with your work.
That's good.
And also traditional African work, which, because you and I wanted to talk about kind of the role of the collector, opens up a whole another can of worms of
Oh yeah.
who has the right to collect
Who
this
did
work.
that? Right. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so
That's true. Very true.
I'll be putting myself in the hot seat with that one.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
Okay.
That's good.
Well, thank you for being with us today.
No problem. I appreciate it. It's always good seeing you. And like I said, I'm very honored to show the works and, for the student body and the community to see, the exhibition. So thank you again.